set up there. Okay. We are live, everyone, for the latest episode of our Game Dev Roundtable series, where we'll be discussing design and industry topics with our panel of guests here. So, I'm hearing some good old feedback there, but I think we're good.
Yeah, I think Seth needs to mute his video.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. Should be fine now.
Oh, someone always accidentally does that. It's like a normal thing for these roundtables. But we have a great topic for this month. We're going to be talking about min-maxing, how it is emphasized in games, and how games are sometimes designed around either rewarding it or absolutely requiring it. But before we get to that discussion, it is once again time to do our around the room introduction. So we'll start with me and work our way around like that. So I am Josh Bycer from Game Wisdom. I am, of course, the owner here, as well as the author of 20 Essential Games and the Game Design Deep Dive series, with my fourth book, Horror, just coming out this month. And I'm going to be working on Free to Play sometime in 2022. So up to Tomo.
Hi, I'm Tomo Moriwaki. I'm a game designer of 20 plus years. I am a co-founder of a small studio called Hyperkinetic Studios, and we have a game internally called Epic Tavern that's available on Steam Early Access, all about storytelling.
All right, over to Seth.
Hey, I'm Seth Goldberg, and this time I'm rocking a Yeti mic, so I won't sound like I'm in a tunnel. I run the Strategy Informer, which is a big project that not only does reviews and news and critical pieces on game design. I also do the PR work for Strategy Mill, which produces the game Terminal Conflict. And I've got about 20 years in the industry as well, mostly in MMOs.
Okay, and to Ramin.
My name is Ramin Shokrizad. I'm a game economist, game scientist, and game ethicist, and game designer. I'm a co-founder of a crypto blockchain MMO company called Aravant. We are approaching our first pre-sale of our first game, Star Garden. That's it.
I'm Sharky Shark, also known as Jim Takersweet. I am the owner of Nexus Games, soon to be renamed. I am a UI artist, writer, game designer. I wear a lot of hats. There's, pretty much all the hats I wear except for programming and music. I'm currently working on the game Neon Continuum, which is a grid-based CCG, which is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is great to have everybody on for our discussion. I can see that glare starting to pop up behind me. I may have to get up and fix that. But before we do that, let's get to, I guess, our first question or our first topic to discuss. So, as I said... Oh, wait. Oh, hello, Chris. Hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully, I'm not sure if you're in the car listening to us, but we have a little radio show for sure tonight. But our topic is min-maxing. And this is the concept, for those of you watching who don't know what we're discussing, is the idea of playing a game in the most optimal way possible. Doing, the most minimum effect to get the most maximum impact. It is a term that we commonly it's something that we commonly discuss when we talk about RPG-based games. This idea that you can have 5, 10, 30 different stats, but there is a precise number that will get you the most impact for it. We can also talk about this in terms of games that are built on different strategies, different builds, where there is, the one amazing build, that one thing that is always great, and if you want to play the game at the most optimal way, that's how you're going to approach it. So it is something that some games are, as we've said, designed around. Some games can passively reward it, and some games it is almost all but required if you want to stand a chance, or at least see everything that's in it. So, my first question for the group here, and I'll let whoever wants to start first go free, or feel free. What do you think about the act of min-maxing? Is it something that should be, emphasized by the developer, or should it be something that kind of, comes about over the course of playing the game in a way?
So I can start. First of all, I'd like to kind of broaden this, what we're talking about here, right? The min-maxing is sort of the gamer parlance simply for optimizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get a better result out of reconfiguring or modifying kind of the proportions of your approach or the sequence of what you do. And so I think it is, at that level, it is essential to everything in the gameplay experience, even if it comes down to sometimes like when I'm watching the thing, because there isn't a lot of interactivity, that I'm thinking more optimal thoughts. But that said, now the true min-maxing that we really, really want to get into going here is there. I think there is something essentially connected between this sort of imagination of the hardcore gamer and min-maxing. It's how much energy and effort you put into analyzing the game to get, is a 1% improvement, how much is it worth? How much of your time is it worth to you? And I think that as you design games more and more for a harder core audience, although that statement in and of itself is, is not a singular group of people, it matters more and more because it's depth that you can create and make available, and then have some expectation that players are going to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my experience, min-maxing used to be called being a munchkin, and was a derogatory term towards players in D&D. And then later, being a munchkin became popular. So people have been doing this, in the role-playing arena and also the wargaming arena, since it started. So as we evolved into computer games, I think that it should be catered to, for one, because that's a style of playing. Also, if you look at the mobile games, especially your incrementals, they're built on getting that 1% increase. They're built on, getting up to the point where you can get to the next thing. And that's part of the addictive quality to those min-max players. If they're not min-maxing, they're not advancing for the most part. And everybody's looking for the meta. Everybody is looking for the meta. In card games, in League of Legends, you're looking for the meta. Now, what's interesting, Epic Tavern is a role-playing game. How do you min-max an Epic Tavern? I mean, obviously, you can cater to the stats, but I'm interested to see if you guys built anything into that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because we do, in a manner of speaking, but definitely not in any of the conventional ways. That certainly you can min-max stats, you can min-max sort of like party composition and sort of skill distribution. But in our logic, in some ways, it's min-maxing is exploring the story space and tuning it into, like, managing the sort of larger narrative to kind of create sort of story results that can lead to kind of character improvements and can lead to unlocking of various things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still not like, it's not like a games as a service hard, like it's not like Warframe min-maxing, for example, where the meta may drift. As the meta drifts, the entire audience needs to be like studying.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, certainly in stuff like World of Tanks and those type of games, and definitely MMOs. Everybody, in an MMO is looking for the meta and the best builds.
Any like real esports game, anything that's played at a competitive level, for sure. You're always looking for, even if it's a 2% fire increase, 0.75% more damage. I mean, there was that whole thing when someone was like sending death threats to, I think, the Call of Duty developer because they changed the firing speed on a weapon by like 0.1%.
Now, personally, well, go ahead. Never mind.
Okay, yeah, I want to get in here somewhere. I think that if you go back, like as Seth was saying, back in time to when um, humans were involved in gameplay, you might be playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where the Munchkin term came from, where one person would be like, "Oh, I'm going to parlay because I want to actually like role play," and then the Munchkin will come up and say, "Forget that! I'm pulling out my +5 Vorpal sword of humanoid slaying. I'm just going to whomp him," and and then oh, I'm going to do this or that to give me a +5 on my roll, blah blah blah, and then just completely destroys whatever they had a chance to talk to, completely removes any opportunity for role playing, and that's why the Munchkin became like a really derogatory term. But Seth was alluding to when we stopped playing with humans and started playing with computers, there was no one around to complain that you weren't talking or role playing because the computer didn't care, and it all became about the bigger numbers, the highest DPS, the fastest attack rate, the most synergies, the most compounding effects, and now everybody's like trying to find what different things can I take, or what different items can I use that will compound and give me some crazy number that is completely game breaking, and that used to be, everybody used to hate that player. But now everybody wants to be that player because now we pretty much removed humans from the loop.
I think that was the basis of MUDs and Mushes.
And rogues,
and roguelikes later. Breaking the game was a big thing. Being a Munchkin was, everybody on a MUD was a Munchkin.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about like people viewing this as derogatory in a second, but for you, Shark, especially with design Chromasia and especially with doing Neon Continuum, like your games are very numbers heavy, so there is always that element of min maxing. So when you were with design Chromasia and with your design on Neon Continuum, what are your thoughts on how somebody can play these games, at that optimal level?
Well, I think that every game has its own, I guess, way of play, and I think that not every game is meant for this, but I think most games would benefit from multiple ways to min max, to where you balance it in such a way that there's many different ways to min max, and there's each one of those areas have strengths and weaknesses, and to where everything in term is balanced in min maxing because they balance against each other, and this is not for every game. Like I know my game Chromasia did not have this, but like the current game Neon Continuum does have this, to where you're able to not only min max each faction, but min max several different ways within each faction, and then having 5 different factions that you can min max, kind of thing. There's just so many combinations there, and then you can also min max combos between different factions, and there's this whole variety, which that in itself will should create a weird meta state, to where there's multiple metas going on at the same time and constantly rolling around, in theory.
Yeah, and that I think is a really good example of why I included a Disgaea in my thumbnail for the Roundtable, as the Nice games are famously at this point known for pretty much building grinding into the equation, but they do it in a way that it's built on multiple subsystems. That's not just you know, running around in an MMO killing rats for 1,000 hours, like what they did in the World of Warcraft episode from South Park. But
yeah, Disgaea is a really interesting
mhm,
example because, like, it is that sort of. It's sort of like almost kind of a blend between the two. You know,
mhm,
it's technically by all technical uh limits, it is just a one way to min max, but because they have, you know, which is getting just strictly bigger numbers.
mhm,
But the thing that really kind of pushes it in the other direction, but it's not technically going in the other direction, is there's so many different progression systems in the game that allow you to push up that number in like 500 different ways, and then you get to choose which way you go, and you do the combo of them. You can go in and, you know, go into the item world, get some residents that increase your exp, and then you can,
mhm.
you know, build up faster. You can go in there and get, you know, ones that increase your mana, build that up faster and boost stuff, all that. You can, you know, and then that's just like, you know, and that's just like two aspects of the item world that you can do, you know, and there's like, I don't know, about 100 in there, and
Mhm.
then that's just one of the, like, I don't know, like 20 or 30 different progression systems they have. I mean, there's a stuff in the Senate, there's all kinds of different ones. I could go on
Yep.
forever on this, but like that different level of the sheer number of options of progression systems that you can take, and that you
Mhm.
can take multiple of them, you know, one after another, just allows you to, it makes, you know, where, you know, usually with a RPG or something, grinding, you know, is fun in a small limited portion, but
Mhm.
the Disgaea makes it where grinding is the core gameplay loop. It's the most fun thing to do because of the multiple progression systems. Where the, you know, your normal RPG only
Mhm.
has like a few different, progression systems. They have leveling, buy new
Mhm.
gear, you know, get new skills, which are normally attached to leveling. So it's really, you know, in most cases, just leveling and buying new gear. And if you're not at a shop, you can't do new gear. So it's just leveling. So, like,
Mhm.
it gets very dry very quickly. And that's the reason why, you know, like good RPGs are designed that only that has a limited progression systems. They can only, you know, you should limit how much grinding there is so
Mhm.
that you don't hit that point where you just, you know, wear out its welcome. But Disgaea, with its multiple progression systems, just makes grinding almost the most fun part of the game.
Yeah, and the very much the fact that there are multiple routes. Like, I wasn't really thinking about this before we started, but there are definitely parallels to the idle genre. The idle games are, of course, very much built on grinding based systems. But one of the things that I think kind of separates the good from the bad is that a lot of them are just built on one way, that you are going to do the same thing, reset, do the same thing again and again. There's this one, I'm not sure if you guys have played it, a Realm Grinder. This is, I think, from a few years ago, that of all the idle games that I've played, or all like that kind of design, it had the most possible variety in terms of options, in terms of what you can do on each run. Whereas I tried to go back and play Cookie Clicker that got re-released, and I was just getting bored of it. And I remember spending hours of grinding cookies, 10 years ago.
Well, the interesting fact about that is the Realm Grinder to Cookie Clicker is there are two different types of incremental idle
Mm-hmm.
games. In Cookie Clicker, you just go in and you spend your cookies, and maybe you pop a couple of the worms if you've gone that route, and you're done. With Realm Grinder, it's a pretty active game if you're playing optimally
Mm-hmm.
and doing the ascensions and choosing what race you're doing in each gold level is pretty important to get through it fairly quickly, or you get bogged down.
Yep.
The walls in that are pretty steep.
Yep. Definitely. And
So,
I
go
like
ahead.
that game. That's all I'm saying. I'm just because if I start talking about it, I'll talk too long.
yeah, and like that again is like another big point about games that are designed or take into their process the use of min maxing. Is that what happens if you don't min max? Does the game become, in some cases, inherently more fun? In the sense that, you know, I'm going to keep, I don't have to worry about if I'm the flavor of the month build, or is it a case like Realm Grind or a lot of games where if I don't min max, I'm done. I'm going to hit that wall and I'm going to hit it very hard.
Yeah, they're designed to push you to that wall. So maybe you'll spend the $5 on the times 10 modifier or whatever it is. I mean, that's seriously part of the design. I think every incremental game by nature is a min max game. You have to min max in an incremental. But the other side of that is, isn't any RPG an incremental in nature? You're incrementally getting more powerful as you go through the game.
They just make you click more buttons.
Yeah, and we already said that the MMOs are incremental in nature and min max in nature. So it's very pervasive. But the human, and maybe Ramin could speak to this, the human desire to be the best and to come out on top. I mean, even people are min maxing on Call of Duty.
Yep.
That's also the temptation to cheat. But I don't like. I personally think that this emphasis on the win loss binary, especially in multiplayer games, is toxic and pushes people to do anything from antisocial to just bannable activities just to try to be the winner instead of just enjoying the gameplay experience or enjoying their fellow players. There are some games that were designed to encourage both min maxing and it would assume you would min max and find like countermeasures for every min max. Like the best example I could think of was probably the most complex MMORTS I've ever played in the first MMORTS, which was Shattered Galaxy.
Me
where,
too.
for instance, you might have, all right, you could make a one of these. What it was called? It was a tank. I forgot the name of the tank, but you could make a tank and get the armor so high that you could drop it on the point of contention, and everyone would be shooting at you for like 5 minutes, and they couldn't harm you, and you just end up taking the point of contention. But at the same time, there were these little airborne units that if you anticipated that in time, you could bring them in, and they had armor piercing bombs that would just ignore armor entirely. And this guy would be all smug and thinking, "Hi, you can't touch me." And you come in with your little flying bombers and just roast him in like 2 seconds, and he'd be like,
Yeah, and
"That was my best tank."
oh yes, good memories there. And I'm glad that you brought up the idea that this can promote toxic behavior on me, because that kind of gets at what Chris was talking about earlier, and the other side of games that kind of encourage min-maxing, especially in any kind of multiplayer, competitive setting, things like that. So, two examples that I think about. The first one is from Payday 2. And this is again how games can kind of. It may not start out min maxing, but it definitely becomes min maxing. When you play Payday 2, a lot of high level survival, I'm talking about playing it on Death Wish 1 down difficulty, is about optimizing your builds and your weapons. There is a term that was thrown around a lot by expert Payday 2 players. I think it was just one bullet kill, or they use like a fancier phrase for that. And what that meant was optimizing your guns in a way that you can guarantee to kill the normal characters with one bullet. Because if you can kill them with one bullet, it makes it a lot easier to conserve your ammo. So the highest difficulty plays was built entirely on these specific builds. If you weren't running, build A, B, C, or D, you were a detriment to the team, you were useless, how dare you play the game, you get vote kicked out, like the second you show up, with another build. And then...
Yeah, thing in League as well.
Mm-hmm.
Get thrown out.
Oh, yeah. And then the other thing that thankfully I haven't played this, but I've been watching YouTube videos and just kind of dipping my toe into Toxicity, is from Dead by Daylight. And watching some of the people who play Dead by Daylight, it just seems like the horror toxicity manifested there. There are people who complain if you play too good. There are people who complain if you do certain things that are part of the gameplay, if you're not winning enough, if you're not helping out enough. The entire game, there are just, dozens and dozens of videos of just horrifically toxic players in Dead by Daylight. And the game, again, seems like it's kind of built to reward that kind of behavior in terms of how the systems are set up.
Well, this can backfire on you too. I mean, I played with Korean teams where, like in Shattered Galaxy, where they would insist on you min-maxing everything. So they had protocols for everything. You had to do everything this way, or they would kick you. And I would, in that game, I would anticipate what people would do, and I would make a counter unit that was not min-max, but it was designed to fool or trick the people who are min-maxing, and I would just take them out, person after person, and they'd be like, "How is he doing it?" Well, I mean, because they become so predictable. Same thing in my when I play Ways of History with the Russian teams. They're always into min-maxing, so they always do the exact same thing. I always know what technologies they're going to do next, what units they're going to build, what tactics they're going to use, and the fact that they are they lack the creativity to do anything other than min-max means that predictability means they're actually quite easy to defeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've encountered that in Magic the Gathering where people were min-maxing playing a certain white deck or a certain blue deck or a certain white-blue deck kind of thing. And basically their whole entire strategy is we're either going to, we're going to, find what how you're going to win. And then we're going to find your key cards and we're either going to destroy them in the case of white or counter them when they're played in blue kind of thing, or, a combination in between. And that was all they did kind of thing. So I ended up growing a hate for white and blue in Magic the Gathering, and I built a red and black deck that was all built around having 20 different win conditions, and each one of those win conditions are linked between a few different cards, so that even if they get rid of all of even if they exhaust all their stuff kind of thing, they cannot get rid of all my win conditions. So it was just a matter of time until I won. And I just started stomping all of them with that new deck kind of thing. And then everybody seen that, and everybody started trying to imitate my deck, and then they built inferior versions that only had
Well, during the time that I was involved in Magic heavily and doing the Grand Prix.
I'm sorry, Seth. I think Shark's mic was bringing up. Are you still there, Shark?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I thought he finished. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sharky, if you got more.
Unsure where my mic cut me off at.
You were talking about they were making inferior decks to try and copy it.
and then I crushed them too. So it was, their predictability. The fact that they did not build those decks themselves and they just went to a deck list kind of thing just enabled me to be able to, they didn't know deck other than what what they had learned from playing it. They didn't, spend the effort into making the deck. So they didn't fully recognize its, full potential, where mine was self-built. So I knew everything my deck could do where they didn't. And that's what really shifted the calls there.
Right. Gellert in the chat brings up a good point that, there's a standard meta in every trading card game, or pretty much every card game. When I was doing the Grand Prix, we would be up all night testing 8 or 9 decks against every counter. And we had piloted these decks for months online. There was IRC versions of doing Magic the Gathering before there was the actual software for it, and certainly before Arena, and that's what people still do now on the pro circuit. So I want to bounce that back to you, Sharky. How are you handling the meta in your card game? Are you just allowing meta, or are you trying to counter it, or what?
I'm trying to create basically a meta that's always changing. Because, like, I'm trying to make it where there's no one way to play it, and there's tons of ways to play it. And in those tons of ways, there's tons of min-maxing, tons of different metas that can be created. And, every meta has a counter kind of thing. And then, just, where when you have, like, Magic Gathering with just the white decks that can just destroy anything kind of thing, that's an answer to anything, and when you have the counter, that's a counter to anything, and I'm building these sets to where there is, if there is a counter to everything, and there is a few, they're in all decks, not just one or two, kind of thing. And just trying to build it in such a way that no deck has a literal answer to everything on its own.
Yeah. So doesn't that make the game a little more luck based? If you hit your combo before the counter comes out?
Not really, because I mean there's no quote unquote combos kind of thing. It's all about placement and tactics, because you're placing them out on this grid, and each of those, I mean, when you talk about the 4 stats they have, they're 1 through 9, never higher, never lower. There is some that will be different though, but outside of those, what it is they're using greater than, less than, equal to, represented by color, and basically only the attacker's color matters. So no matter what number the opponent has, there are always exactly 9 numbers that can beat it, because there's always one number equal to it, and 8 numbers that are greater than and lower than it. So defense wise, every card is just as vulnerable as any other. Attack wise is a different story. If you have a blue 9, which is greater than, that can beat a 1 through 8. If you have a 1 blue, it can't beat anything. But like, the defense wise is really the, having something that is unbeatable is really the core to things, not having a counter, and everything has a counter. Then you get into abilities, and there are certainly some abilities in there that can be really powerful, like where you attack it, and when it loses a fight, it goes back to your hand, but the person has to repay the energy cost and everything to get it out. So they don't lose a card, but they have to repay all the cost to play it. And also on top of that is there are cards out there that can just get rid of powers. It'll only get rid of one power, but most cards only have one power. Very few cards have two. So there's always a solution, and there's always never a indestructible strategy, and it's all about how you use your cards rather than what cards you have.
Gotcha.
Let's see. Yeah, and I'm glad Chris brought up that question because that was something that I wanted to also ask. But before we get to that one, Tomo or anyone else, you have any thoughts on min-maxing in kind of like a multiplayer or like, trying to curb toxic kind of behavior when it comes to this?
The curbing of toxic behavior is its own trick, right? So, I mean, I think we see a wide range of toxicity in games, and there's still, even across games that may have kind of similar levels of complexity and therefore kind of supportive of kind of similar amounts of kind of min-maxing or meta play styles. One thing I think that can help is when, if it is a player versus player experience, that you're constantly sort of working to kind of maintain multiple approaches, at least the approaches that are popular. So that way players who have an affinity for maybe not the best strategy are still functional and reasonably effective. But games like that are sort of fading away because these sort of action games, these action PvP experiences are more and more moving towards games as service, and they just pursue a totally different approach to the way they deal with the meta. And I mean, that almost wants to be the next question or a subsequent question down the line, because the way you navigate an entire user base that tries to figure out the new meta, kind of in this season or what have you, and then adjust to it, and then disabuse themselves of yesterday's meta that's been nerfed. I mean, that is an enormous percentage of the chatter for so many games now going forward, and it's a functional part of it. It's not like this problem. It's almost like the essential core of how the kind of the sine wave of the user base as it goes forward.
Yeah, I think preventing toxicity is two main aspects. And when we're referring to a multiplayer game, and that would be because you really don't have, you have toxicity outside a game in a single player game, but you don't have toxicity inside the game really in a single player, not in the same way, but in a multiplayer game. I think one thing is to make sure that the mechanics are fair and balanced and have a counter, and use a strategy over just numbers kind of thing. And the other thing gets us kind of off topic, which I'm sure Ramin can testify to, is that if you have an abusive monetization model kind of thing, then you're being toxic to your players. So your players are going to be toxic in the game because of that. Because, if you hit somebody repeatedly, more than likely they're going to hit somebody else, kind of thing. But you got to treat your consumers right to have, I think, any real good chance at having a good community.
Am I the expert at monetization or the expert at getting off topic?
Maybe both.
So, were you going to go? There was a long pause.
Well, I'm just trying to be civil. In Star Garden, this is especially a problem because when you try to make a free-to-play, play-to-earn game, everybody and his brother and sister is going to try to make a bot to go in and farm your game.
Oh, yes.
And I even, in yesterday's Q&A session, I even had somebody ask me, "Oh, can I make instead of having 20 people making friends and cooperating in a Star Garden, can I just make 5 accounts and run them all in one Star Garden and have the entire tribe be me, and I was like, and I just, I said, in other words, you're asking me if you can bot my game, and I'm like, you're free to try. I didn't explain it, I was almost challenging him to bot my game because I've designed the whole game to be a hellscape for bots. Not because I want to go in and do active countermeasures and try to find all the bots and ban them. That's a waste of effort. I'm just designing my whole game so that when somebody comes in and tries to min-max my game with a bot, they'll get annihilated. And the way I do that is, by having 1,000 different creatures in my game, it isn't there just to provide 3+ years of content, keep people interested, keeping things changing, so they keep getting their dopamine or whatever. But it's also so that bots will a bot that's in a good position today will be obsolete a few days later. So you would constantly have to be changing your bots every few days, and essentially you'd have to be playing the game instead of botting, which is exactly what I want. If they want to try to run 5 accounts and constantly keep up with all that, that's fine. I've got every creature in the game that I built, just like with Shattered Galaxy, has one or more counter units, and I've also anticipated things like, somebody might try to bring in a small unit with a slow ability to slow the target while the big guys take it out. Well, I set up things like limits on this because creatures vary in size in Stargarden from size 1 to size 100,000. So, I mean, you've got everything from, you've got on one end, you're starting with things like lizards and spiders and little fairy bugs and things like this. And on the other end, you have star cruisers and ancient red dragons and, and heroes and stuff on the other end. So, so that I've got special abilities like that will swap units around so they'll be screwed up and not be in the right position for their range. I've got units that will go to the back row and assassinate those pesky ranged attackers. I've got people with roots or grabs and then AI that will determine what it'll go after, and then other things that will try to screw up the AI of other creatures. So it's constantly a game to try to see if you can outsmart the other player, which is what I want. I want people to be constantly thinking, and maybe it's the same part of your brain that you use for min-maxing, but it's a form of min-maxing that changes almost daily, so that they never just get stuck saying, "Oh, everybody has to play it this one way."
And again, like that, and what we're discussing, or the chat is discussing, about having that rotating meta is a very crucial point about cutting out that level of min-maxing that you. And again, like, we have people on this table who worked on or are working on multiplayer-based games, and everyone knows that a stale or fixed meta is oftentimes the death nail for these kinds of multiplayer-based experiences. That if somebody ever does discover that one true build that is 100% good all the time, that just sinks all your competitive behavior in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when you have to ban a card like they did with Teferi in Magic the Gathering. I'd like, if I could, to bring this back to tabletop role-playing games. And, I talked to Ramin about this yesterday. And some of them were built entirely on the concept of min-maxing the hell out of it. Something like Champions, when you build a character in Champions and you've got 300 points, it's designed to cause you to min-max that. Take all the disadvantages you can possibly get away with, turn all your powers into focuses, which makes them cheaper. So like, Green Lantern stuff, stuff like that. That someone's cane, producing.
You mean like my blind quadriplegic no normal defense psionic user?
Oh, I had one of those as well. He could only lie in his hospital room until someone walked in and he exploded and killed the city. It was an incredible feeling to be competing against the GM with what you could build and what you can get away with.
Oh, yes. And that, I think, we can also kind of use that as a segue into talking about things from a PvE or a player versus the game kind of standpoint. This was a question that Chris brought up earlier about kind of when you're designing a game around the player versus the environment. So we're not talking about multiplayer anymore. We're talking about building a single player or even maybe just a players versus the AI kind of challenge. And this is a different experience when it comes to how you approach this. Because, for one thing, the player is not going up against another player. So you have that asymmetry at work. And we've seen games that kind of push this really, really far. And there's two examples that come to my mind. The first was Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga. This was one of the many Shin Megami Tensei games that was released over the last 20 years. And what they did for the super final optional boss in that game was the boss, if you did anything that was off pattern or anything that you basically went off script for that fight, the boss would punish you with a 10,000 point attack. But you see, here's the problem. Your max health is only 9,999. So there is literally no way in hell you would survive this attack. And the only way you would have any remote chance of winning that fight is, I remember reading like a game facts. Like this person did a turn-by-turn itemized script of everything you have to do for, I think it was like 30 to 50 turns to beat this boss. And like that was the only way you could win that fight, just because of how rigid it was designed. And then we have games I just recently finished, Library of Ruina, and this is a game that they really lean into. Oh, you like building a set strategy? It ain't working for this one, because every boss, every encounter has its own unique rules to it. So, a shout for anyone watching this, live or recorded, who beat the Apocalypse Bird. I know no one on this panel knows what I'm talking about with that fight, but for all the Library of Ruina fans watching, let me know in the comments if you did manage to beat that fight. Because, again, it is that case of the game is giving you a challenge, saying that you must deal with X, Y, and Z, and it is up to you to create the most optimal and best strategy that counters XYZ. So, for the table here, I guess the long-winded question is, if you're building content to challenge a player, how far do you think you should go in terms of, making that fight as punishing as possible or as skill demanding as possible?
Want to encourage people to run bots just because I've made it impossibly, 50 steps have to be exactly done right. That's the type of thing that a computer does well, not a human. So what you're going to end up having is people playing, bots playing your game while they sit and watch TV or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, grinding encourages bots, especially if it's repetitive, really repetitive grinding, because you just write some JavaScript that'll do it over and over. I mean, that kind of destroyed Diablo 2's economy and Diablo 3 for that matter. And I assume the botting's still going on the remaster. But if we talk about min max, isn't speed running min maxing?
For a lot of the games, definitely.
I mean, you're the Mario expert, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, speedrunning is a form of it, I'd say. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, like, with Mario, it's not so much speedrunning like in a Mario game, but if we're talking about speedrunning in RPGs and games like that, it is very much built on that min-maxing. They know exactly how high to take their stats, they know exactly what fights to do, and they get it down, again, in that itemized format in order to play the best way.
And then what fights to avoid.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tomo.
I would go so far as to say that in the context of single-player games, as complexity rises, the game fundamentally becomes simply one of min-maxing, and that you can't distinguish the kind of intended gameplay from that. You're not having different conversations. They're the same conversation. That you have a certain set of mechanics, and those mechanics have some degree of optimal use. And by not using those optimal use of the rules, you're either choosing or inadvertently playing less efficiently or optimally. Like you take a game like Grim Dawn, for example. It's like, of course, speedrunning is important, right? Because I need to be able to complete those levels faster as I try to take whacks at the RNG to get the gear I'm looking for. And I need the highest possible difficulty in order to have the highest possible, potential drops coming out of the machinery. You take like a game like Destiny 2, I think is a great example too, where we're cooperating with each other to do fundamentally that. And the knowledge, your understanding of the game, how in the know you are of the approach, the meta approaches for various content, is literally your status, your measure of how serious a player you are in those environments. And I mean, granted, when it's multiplayer cooperative, what's nice is you're not using it to like beat someone over the head with it over and over again and like yell at them that they suck, although people still yell at each other that they suck. But you do spread that information around, right? That's how you become in the know. You're like, oh, so-and-so performed twice as well as I did, and I thought I understood this game. And then you change your approach. And if those discoveries weren't actually in the configuration of the rule set, you'd play the game less. You'd have less moments of epiphany, and you'd be, in the end, less interested.
Yeah, and going off of what you said, like one game that basically doesn't allow you to min-max to a point at the same time is the one that you're always aiming to min-max would be Disgaea, because like all the different progression systems, there's so many different ways to min-max kind of thing. So like it's not even a choice to which way is the right way. It's which way do you want to go kind of thing, instead of which way do you want to min-max rather than
you must
this
do
is how
this.
you min-max and I'm going to go min-max kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there are certain parts of it that are kind of hard, where, you definitely want to go grab an EXP boost and stuff like that, but they have caps on that, and that will only take you so far. And when the max level on that game is like, I think it's like 10,000 or 100,000, you just can go so far. And even being max level does not mean you're all that strong, because you can be, like I currently have characters that are like level like 9, 7,000-8,000, so they're near max kind of thing. And I have a whole lot of other stuff, on top of that I've been maxed. And I could not even dream of doing more than probably about 50 damage to the ultimate boss of the game, because there's just so much more that I have to do. I am just, I'm just getting started, as you would say, kind of thing. Like but most games do not have that many or that level of progression systems that can allow that. But if you do, then you can break that by essentially encouraging it to a larger degree by, having like just so many choices on how you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't touched on strategy, and I am the strategy informer. So anytime you have a closed system, like a tech tree, advancement. I mean, let's look at Civ for an example. When you play deity level Civ or immortal level Civ, you have to min-max or the computer will outperform you. Absolutely have to. And these people have found the optimal path to get through the tech tree and snowball. And that's built into the design, I believe. Well, not really built into the design. I don't think they do it intentionally. It's just a side effect of using that closed system.
Yeah. XCOM is another really big example of that. If you're trying to play, like, it's been a while since I played the original one, but if you're trying to play either one of Rax's one, if you're playing though on Legend difficulty, you got one way to play that game. Like, if you lose, like, one character in, like, your first, like, 2 or 3 missions, you're restarting your entire campaign. Because the game is inherently set up that you start falling behind, you are screwed in terms of trying to survive at that difficulty.
Yeah.
Or any difficulty for that matter. You're just, as being a professional, you can definitely, more roll with the punches when there's more flexibility in the difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite strategy for XCOM in the beginning was I'd get those, those heavy explosives you start the game with that you don't have to research. You can't throw them very far, but I'd try to like get up on a roof or something and throw it on another building and just obliterate everything in the building with one of these things, because everything in that game in the beginning can kill you on a counterattack.
Oh, yes.
So you need the biggest, baddest attack to just take out all the aliens in one shot so that they wouldn't get a chance to counter you.
Yeah. And that actually takes me to a question. I think this kind of goes with what Seth was just talking about in terms of games that kind of pigeonhole you into those strategies, and what Chris was asking earlier. That for a lot of these games, that as you go up in difficulty or as you start to master them, certain options just get cut. If the fire build is your weakest strategy, why would you want to build a fire character in a game? You want to build, whatever is the best one. So
Absolutely.
The question that kind of brings up is, for the table here, when you hit those points where, all the thought process kind of melts away and it just comes down to, okay, this is the strategy that's the best. This is what I must do to beat this game, and if I do it, I will win 100% of the time. If you come across that strategy, do you use it when you play a game? And, like, for myself personally, I typically don't. I don't like to min-max a lot of games like that, because it just feels like I'm kind of like robbing myself of the experience. That if I know that, if I just do A, B, C, and D every time, I'm going to win, there's no real point in playing it. Like, it goes to something that Ramin was saying about, it just becomes like a bot. You could just turn on a bot, let them play the game, and you'll win every time. It's why I've never really gotten into, like, MMOs and raiding. That I've watched, like, high-level World of Warcraft players who do, like, those kinds of raids on their streams, and the whole thing just seems like a huge, like, completely against how I would ever want to play a video game like that.
I think in general you want to avoid having just one way, or one optimal way. You want to try to avoid that in most cases. I mean, there are exceptions, kind of thing, depends on the game, but like, Chromasia, I think, would fit into that one of those examples. But like, I think that if, like, the developers behind FTL would absolutely want to avoid that, and I think they did a pretty well job at it, because there's no one way to beat that final boss. There's no one strategy that beats it, easily or anything like that. There's many combinations of stuff to beat it, kind of thing. And there's many different ways you can go about beating it, but no one way is going to solve it. I mean, you would do the crew teleport method, kind of thing, and just teleport in and destroy, elements. But, if you kill all their crew, then the AI takes over and you're screwed, kind of thing. So you can't just depend on that. You can't depend on any one method. You really have to use your brain and deal with solve the puzzle that the RNG is basically giving you to what would be the optimal course to be able to beat the final boss in FTL, at the same time of being able to get to that point along the way.
having to
and the challenges that will rise between there. So like, you know, they're a really good example, I think, of having multiple ways to get there, you know, and multiple ways to win, and no one set path kind of thing. But it's not that a set path is necessarily bad, but I think that in a lot of cases, a set path is bad, but not all.
Yeah.
If you're playing something like Axis and Allies, you're going to need to follow the optimal path, or you don't have a chance of winning, and you'll blow it for your side if that's the case. I mean, it's almost a solved game at this point. And backgammon's solved if you're playing at competitive levels of backgammon. You know, if you're in a certain position and you're in a certain spot, your die roll, there is an optimal position completely. And eventually chess will be solved. I mean, it's close.
And it is solved, actually, right? I mean, the computer has it figured out. Just like in some ways Go is nearly solved, which is almost mind-boggling in terms of the actual number of possible ways things can go.
Yeah. And
I have I think that we are fixating on this context of min-maxing when a game is not as soundly designed as it could be. Min-maxing is really just exploiting and breaking the expectations of the developer.
Yes.
And so in those circumstances, obviously, you know, we in that context, using the min-max term is a way to harm your experience. But like, you know, when Seth brings up the Civ analogy, and honestly, all of the time we've spent in, you know, ARPGs, period, when getting a better result allows you to either accumulate resources or get gear faster, or, you know, or better gear, then it's never an exploit under those circumstances. And, you know, like we take like Path of the Exile, you're desperate to learn how to optimize because you want to succeed better. You want to go further down the path in that single player experience, which at its core is fundamentally one of exploring the complexity of the rules, right? And so when you find intersections with significant jumps in power, that's kind of the essential core of the objective structure. I'm looking to find how this build gives me like a 75% increase to damage, which now makes it so that that level 8 difficulty setting is now achievable. And then I'm blown away when I realize someone can get a 450% increase in damage, making the level 8 difficulty trivial. And that's, now I understand that the level 16 difficulty is achievable. And then I, you know, find some video and or find it myself, right? I'm constantly exploring what appear to be impossible to estimate improvements because of the complexity of tech trees and gear combinations and certain tactical approaches. Like, min-maxing is essential gameplay. And, you know, it's like, you know, Seth mentioned strategy. It's like, it is the strategy of single-player RPGs or many game types, right? And it is true that the end point of many of those explorations are the game is broken. Like, but that in and of itself doesn't exactly have to be a problem. If you guys remember Oblivion, for example, did you just suddenly hate the game once you became too powerful, or did you just put another 100 hours into it and then go like, okay, maybe I've had enough now?
I got bored.
Well, I got bored with it at 183 hours, and somewhere around the 90 to 110 hour mark, I was overwhelmingly powerful. In fact, what I was doing was walking around with a bunch of reflect damage potions, and actually get, like, you know, like it was like I was playing World of Warcraft. I'd gather up a bunch of units and enemies and drink a bunch of potions and just watch, and I'd laugh, and it was silly. Or become 100% invisible and go like, ha ha ha, the whole game's broken, and kill like literally every single person in the town.
Yeah.
Right. These are things that at least from a system standpoint, become a very enjoyable exploration into the rule set. Now, if I was playing like a dynamic story of some sort, right, and then I killed all the NPCs, and then the story stops, it's like, yeah, I messed up my experience. and in some ways, it's different types of games have different relationships with, I guess, are two tones of the min-max problem space. One is exploit and outside the expectation of developer, and on the other side, it's simply getting the most out of the machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
W.B. Thorfinn brings up an interesting point about, World of Warcraft. They built the meta into the game, and EQ just built 100 spells and let the cards fall. I think that's a good point. In Path of Exile, the trees are absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Did the design team plan a meta or a optimal path when they did it? I don't know that. I mean, in Ultima Online, we didn't. We just designed cool stuff.
Yep.
I think they thought they did. And then I think that as a result of them being live service, actually, this is probably the most interesting. This is the thing I wanted to say on this roundtable, is that games as live service, especially co-op and multiplayer in its nature, and kind of having the ARPG like vibes, creates a meta, the requirement for a drifting meta, and my theory is, at least, or it's my description of it, I guess, is that the developers use the neural network that is their player base to analyze the work they do, and then they watch the outputs, and that becomes the way they steer the boat through the rule set, because you can't keep up, and you can't test like they can. So, like in Destiny 2, right? It's like nobody likes using those weapons. Or this new weapon, which obviously looks like they put a bunch of work into it, it's not that good. And that's not like, oh, we wanted to make that's not that good weapon. That was the plan. In some ways, they're like, we get it. We don't know for sure how this is going to play with millions of people playing with it. And some of it is just up to us to see and then respond. And then it's like, if it's too powerful, they got to nerf it. And sometimes when something isn't powerful enough, they might have like lift it. But in a lot of cases, as this live service developers, it's like you throw 7 or 8 options out into the space for this period of update. And the ones that aren't interesting, you just stop supporting. They just drift off into obscurity, and then you move forward with some new threads. And you just keep the developers keep using the user base as like a deep learning neural network, and they just keep paying attention, and then along the way they get better at delivering new stuff, and then the user base gets better at analyzing it, and that just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling.
Yep. So I have a question for the panel and whatnot. So when it comes to content creators and people watching them, getting deck list offline, that kind of thing, reading strategy guides, that kind of thing. When you're talking about specifically multiplayers, but somewhat single players too, more multiplayer than single player. What do you think? How do you think the role of content creators and whatnot and strategy guides and all this stuff plays into this whole min-maxing?
It's going to happen regardless. If I'm not looking at a Gwent streamer that's mastered the game, I'm going to go through and do permutations on the deck to get the best deck I can.
Yep. And yeah, again, like as I think what Tomo was saying about how like the player base and the developers kind of evolve with how the balancing goes. Players are exceptional when it comes to breaking down mechanics and rules. They are probably better than developers themselves when it comes to playing these games and finding these strategies. And you're never going to stop it. People are going to share information. They're going to figure this stuff out. And it's why you need to have that very, fluid mindset in terms of how your game is going to develop. Because if you think that you can just sit there and, sketch out 5 years of content updates and balance patches without thinking about what your player base is going to do, it's just not going to work once players get in there and break it down. And yeah, and to WB's comment, yeah, exactly. That with streamers, YouTubers, just the internet itself, you don't need to be a grandmaster to get the best option in these games. You just need to follow a grandmaster or watch their video, and they'll tell you everything you need to know to, figure this stuff out. You may not play it at that level, but you'll have all that information.
And that's the reason why I think having a game, when you're talking about a multiplayer game, focused on strategy, that no matter who they follow kind of thing, no matter how much they min-max kind of thing, they have to min-max their brain to be able to actually use that deck or whatever it is to I would say, even not even to its best of its ability, but to 1/10 of its abilities kind of thing. Like, I think, my goal with my game is to build it to where, 1,000 people can have the same deck. And some of them, the people who do not know how to use that deck, do not know the, strategy behind it, do not know how to actually play the cards in, and how to order them kind of thing, then they're going to do probably really badly with that deck. Where somebody who built that deck and has an intimate, knowledge of that deck will know how to fully play it. It's like I don't know. It's like a gun with 10 barrels around it that's going in 360 degrees kind of thing. And if you pull the wrong trigger, you're going to shoot yourself. If you push the right trigger, you're going to shoot the other person. If you shoot, any of the others, it might do, neutral activity kind of thing. But having the gun itself not be the main strategy, but rather how you use the what you have.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare at high competitive play to not net deck. You're playing the most optimal deck you can, and you've piloted it for 6 months. So you absolutely know every play, every card, every counter, what to do each time. No one in competitive play is building a one-off deck. Well, I mean, not no one. That's a blanket statement. But for the most part, and when you look at the T8 or the T4, the T16, you're seeing the same decks in every Grand Prix in Magic the Gathering, in every Hearthstone competition. They're playing Warlock.
I think that's an issue with the game because, like, you're talking about like 6 months. They come out with sets every 3 months, and the fact is if those are not changing, then obviously they're not, shifting or doing anything to counter it. They're in fact encouraging this one strategy to stay alive, kind of thing. And when you're not building in such a way to actually discourage that, then yeah, that's going to run rampant. And that's where you get into metas that do not shift. And I think unshifting metas is a very bad thing. I don't think you should have it set up to where people can just go in there, make one deck, and that's a counter to everything for the next, year kind of thing. Until Magic the Gathering decides to come up with a new meta. I think you should have a design in there to where it's not just one predictable meta kind of thing, and that there's many different metas going on at the same time, and everything's always shifting. And I think that's the way to go, which pretty much counters net decking because I really hate net decking.
I want to chime in here as a time check. We are about an hour and 15 in, so I figure we'll wrap things up in the next 15 minutes if that works for everyone. And
Works for me.
this will be for the chat last call for any questions. Before I get to my point, I wanted to give Ramin a chance. Like, I know sometimes it's hard to jump in. Anything that you want to add regarding what we've been discussing?
I don't know. I keep getting thrown to talking about how this all affects MMOs, but I don't know if that's really like the direction you guys want me to take this.
I think we can certainly talk about it from a communal aspect.
Well, I mean, like in Star Garden, I have these fantasies. I mean, I don't know if it's technically going to be possible or not, but I have these fantasies where instead of in previous games, I may have had ways of detecting bots, and then we just block them or ban them. But I think what would be way more fun is if a bot keeps using the same combination of creatures or the same hand basically in a battle. Just set it up so that the next several monsters that it fights are the counter creatures to the deck it has. It'd be very easy to set up a counter deck and just say, okay, I can see a bunch of people are using this bot. Let's just throw out a bunch of these counter decks, and then they'll just eat it that day, until they come up with a new deck, and then we can just play cat and mouse with them. And I think it would kind of be entertaining for the devs.
Bot versus bots.
I'm pretty sure
I mean,
you wouldn't be able to detect using a lot of fuzzy and some neural net. Especially if I could write the neural net to do a little bit of learning, finding out the best practice and shifting. The problem is that's going to be a very time consuming thing, and it's really not worth it.
Well, I mean, I would just find it entertaining to do just as a developer, if to see how I can counter various decks. I mean, decks tend to be, set up to exploit one particular thing, and so you just find whatever doesn't have that thing it's trying to exploit, and it's pretty easy to counter it. And bots have a tendency to be copied, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So you tend to get a lot of one type of bot. It makes it pretty easy to counter, especially if you just tell your AI, when you see this deck, you throw in this deck.
What about the games that do single player really well, like Runeterra or I mean even kind of Hearthstone with it lately, where the AI is not too bad, and the Hearthstone AI is not great. The Runeterra AI is a lot of fun, and they have a lot of decks that they've built for it, so it's very varied. And I think a lot of people play just the single player mode, so that's kind of a bot against it, and they can use that information to tune the meta, which I believe Tomo was talking about a while ago with the monitoring of the live services.
Well, you don't have to monitor it that way. I mean, you can monitor it just by, every time, a match happens, you can record, for example, in a card game, you can record both people's deck and the actions that were taken, and you can also record who won, and how it is, and then look for patterns.
Oh, sure. It would just be another way of looking at things.
What I was mostly talking about, though, is that actually it's a strategy for maintaining a evolving user base. That it's actually an essential piece of the puzzle. It's not that it's like a long-term strategy for your user base. It's like, well, no, we don't want them to do the same thing all the time, because if they do that, they're going to leave. We need, for this next few months, we need for it to be the right amount of new and additional discovery, and them to adapt to it, and then for them to forget about what they used to do. All right, because otherwise, how are you going to keep people 6-7 years later? And I mean, I think World of Warcraft, maybe even against its own wishes, actually inadvertently played directly into this by completely refacing the entirety of like skills and talent trees, or entirely removing talent trees and some point, like their entire expansion pack sort of reworks were essential. And then in recent times they're trying to shy away from that, and I wonder if that's not actually partly why they're having some difficulties, because it feels the same for longer now.
Yeah,
That
and
goes back to the role and meta being the better kind of strategy.
Yeah, for sure. Because we just aren't good with repetition. Repetition is like almost like mathematical decay of engagement.
Yeah, and that's why there has to be, like we were saying earlier with Disgaea, that if the whole grinding was just literally doing the same exact thing for 50 hours, I think most players would sort of like jump off of their roof. But you have to have those multiple ways.
Well, I mean, dopamine is one of the big reasons people play games, especially if there's a time component. And you get the most dopamine when you do something high risk with a high chance of failure, and you manage to succeed the first time. Every time you do the same thing that you did before, even if it was high risk before, you get less and less dopamine every time you repeat it, because that's nature's way of pushing you to be adventurous and innovative and intelligent. And so, which presumably our species has those traits. But yeah, and this is why when you start to do things over and over again, what we call grinding, it actually becomes the dopamine levels can get so low that they effectively go negative, and it actually becomes painful for you to do that activity, which is why grinding is such a dreaded thing. And so
Especially when you have to limit it.
yeah,
Well,
so you don't in games. It's inherent to keep an engaging game is to not only avoid grind, but keep your challenge and your content constantly rotating, which is easier to do in a games as a service. But you can still do it in a single player game. You just have to be clever about it. I see it as kind of like if you use Star Trek as an example, the Borg have this modulating phaser that can bypass shields by keep changing its frequency so faster than the shields can react, and this allows them to go right through the shields. Well, this is how we can use computers basically to bypass the natural human defense against dopamine adaptation. So you continue to release the dopamine, which is, I mean, it's good and bad. It's great if you want to just completely flood somebody with dopamine. The bad is that could actually be harmful for the player, and the player may not understand this. It might just get so hooked on the dopamine that they can't stop.
And
well, I mean, if you look at casino games, the slots
Exactly.
yeah,
to give you that dopamine rush, and they're running at about a 94% chance of you gaining money, and the house average and the house advantage is 6%, because over time you're gonna lose, but it's gonna be releasing that dopamine fast enough that you're gonna keep pouring quarters into it. The free-to-play mobile community, the good ones, have mastered this.
yep.
And if you look at some of the game companies that Tencent is getting involved in, they're putting in people with casino experience.
Ooh, yes.
They've been doing this for a long time, Seth.
But it's not
This
gambling.
this has been going almost 10 years where they stopped hiring everybody else. Well, they would just basically start hiring nothing but data scientists and casino games people to make games as a service, because they see that as something it's tried and true. I personally don't think it's nearly as effective as the things that come after it, but things that come after it have not been tested as well as thoroughly with the decades of experience as the gambling mechanics have. But we know that gambling mechanics are dangerous for people, especially children.
Yeah.
And so these companies are. This is why I call part of why I call these companies dark siding companies, because they know what they're doing is harmful for their consumers, and they don't care because they prioritize profits so much higher than consumer welfare that consumer welfare just basically doesn't exist for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Since we are coming up on time, I did want to get to one. I guess the final point that I want to make, and then we'll kind of go around the table and give everyone a chance. So when it comes to min maxing, I think kind of what Tomo was saying earlier is where I kind of stand on it, in that at some layer, min maxing is just playing the game. It's about playing the game really well. And there are a lot of people who enjoy learning systems or learning games at that level. It's that idea of kind of you are, quote unquote, getting one over on a developer, that you discover that super secret combination, that you get artifact A and card B and slay the spire, that you just utterly destroy the game. And you think to yourself, oh, the developer didn't think about that, but probably they did. They probably put that in there just for you to figure out that little trick. And when you're trying, like, for games that make min-maxing work, to go back to what Shark was saying in terms of like games like Disgaea or FTL, that I think when it works the best, it's about giving the player multiple routes. At the end of the day, though, whether you're fighting a boss or you're beating up someone in an online game, there's always one question you have to answer. What do I need to do to win? In most roguelike deck builds and whatnot, the answer is, I have to do damage. If I'm not hitting this boss, he's going to kill me. So, to solve that riddle, there's multiple ways to go about that. I'm sure, you remember how we played Monster Train, and how there are many different viable options to beat those bosses. There's not just one.
Even some of the most unviable looking stuff is extremely viable in the right combination, like the imps.
Yeah,
I was about to say imps.
Mm-hmm. And
the imps are just so worthless, but if you do them right, you can absolutely wreck all.
Yep, and to get this back to what Seth was saying about the difference between like EverQuest and World of Warcraft, like I see that when I was playing Inscription the other night. This is the latest game from Daniel Mullins. That there are options in that game that they look horrible. Like it's like, why would I ever take this? But then you find that one card or that one other play, and then suddenly it's like, oh my god, I just broke the game. Like, there's a 4-cost character in that game that you'll never really be able to get 4 costs in Inscription to play. But if you combine that card with a card that it activates from your deck when something on your field gets killed, suddenly you have a 7/7 that gets played for free. And then it's just like, okay, the game is over. And Inscription, much like Monster Train, is set up for like very swingy builds, and it's all game breaking. It is 100%. You are like, you almost feel sorry for the game and for the developer when you figure this stuff out, but that's the point. You're supposed to be looking at these systems and figuring out how things play.
There's systems like every time you deal damage to an enemy, you take twice as much damage. It's like, why would I want that kind of thing? And then you get another power, and it's like, every time you take damage kind of thing, you deal 4 times that damage to the enemy, and you 100% heal all the damage you deal to the enemy. It's like, why wouldn't I want that?
Yeah, like in Library Runa, there is this one combination, like, some of those player bases, like, again, this is why I don't think about min-maxing, but like, there are people who come with like these like galaxy brain uses of the mechanics. Like, there's a character who, whenever she goes, her dice rolls are infinite, so she will always go first in front of everyone else. And then there's a passive you can put on that if your speed is higher than an opponent, you gain more power. So I didn't even think about this when I played, but then I saw someone who combined them. So basically, you know what's higher than 5? Infinity. So every time this character goes, her attacks are fully max, simply because of combining, element A with rule B. And again, this is, I think, where min-maxing works the best. That it's not about finding the one perfect strategy. It's about figuring out what you can really mess around with in these systems. I really wasn't thinking about this during our discussion, but immersive sims, I think, could be maybe a subtle more example of this. That there are games, like Prey 2016, Dishonored, that you are given just a crazy, toolbox of options and powers you can make use of. And the game just basically says, do stuff with it. What can you do? But that's my final thought on the topic, as we are right at time. So I will give everyone a chance to kind of give their final thoughts. So we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Shark this time.
So, I mean, progression, like min-maxing ties a lot to progression systems and all kinds of other different aspects, and I think that you shouldn't necessarily discourage min-maxing, but rather give, in most cases, other ways to min-max, and that's, especially key in multiplayers with a rotating meta that you give. Like, everybody has answers, and everybody can do something and counter something in some way. And it's all about building what you think is best against somebody else who's building what they think is best, kind of thing. And then the two min maxes battle out each other, and one of them wins, one of them doesn't. And maybe that other person changes it. Maybe that other person has won every game but that one. And maybe that one, loses everyone but that one. Maybe that one also won everyone but the one that he beat, that didn't beat the other guy.
All right.
So, like, I think it's really, especially multiplayer, very important to have multiple ways of min-maxing.
All right. Over to Ramin.
When something becomes too common, its value drops. In the case of something like dopamine, where everybody's trying to slam your dopamine because they decide this is their ticket to addict you or engage you or sell to you or whatever, dopamine can actually end up with a negative value because you're fatiguing the consumer so much. Their endocrine system becomes overloaded and fatigued. They actually can feel sick if they keep getting exposed to dopamine. So what I see is the future is us coming full circle, where we go back to that D&D table where somebody wanted to role play and didn't get the chance, and then ultimately the role playing just died because everything got replaced by computers that had no interest in role playing. They just wanted to cater to the min-max or the dopamine or whatever. We can come full circle to bring back the role play, train computers or create systems and games that will actually encourage the role play over the min-max, and now you've resupplied something that's become scarce and very high value because people didn't have access to it for so long.
All right.
I think Epic Tavern does a decent job of trying to bridge that gap between role playing and min maxing. I think that's a great example of maybe going back to it.
I was specifically meaning actually interacting directly with other humans.
Oh yeah, true.
I'm trying to find ways to avoid that, Seth.
I don't want to interact with other people. They scare me.
We can work on that too,
I'm one of those MMO players that just, doesn't party up, doesn't talk to anybody. I just, do my thing.
All right, and over to Tomo.
Oh, can I?
Oh yeah,
Oh.
yeah. I
Final?
think Seth was just making a
Okay.
chiming in.
Statement, yeah. So I think we live in a really neat time where the developers can leverage their communities to help break some of the min-maxing problems so that you don't break the game. Something like Ring of Pain or Vault of Void or even Shadow Government